90% of gamers who regularly play while watching videos fail a basic recall test, both the game and the content they consume. If you think that you're in the exceptional 10%, I thought I was too until I tested it myself and realized something about my attention. And the passive habits of a background entertainment isn't just filling in silence, it's actively reshaping your brain's ability to concentrate on something important. And this effect doesn't just stay concentrated in your gaming sessions, it follows you to every aspect of your life. I remember my dad doing this back in the 90s. He was playing Civilization 2 or Heroes of Might and Magic 2 or 3? I forgot, it's one or the other. And he was watching television. And then 15 years later, around the 2010s, I started doing this because, dual monitors were becoming a thing now. And I thought, I can totally game and watch YouTube at the same time. I mean, most people do it now these days, right? Including young kids. And are you doing this right now at this very moment, listening to this video? And 2 years ago, I was noticing these weird gaps in my day. I'd finish a 3-hour gaming session and barely remember what happened in either the game or the video I was watching. At first, I brushed it off. Who cares if I missed some details? But the past few months, I've noticed this pattern started showing up everywhere in my life. Conversations, important conversations, when I'm studying for something, even when reading a simple article, my brain seemed trained to just constantly split focus. Have you ever wondered why you can't remember what happened in that YouTube video you just watched while grinding in your favorite game? Because I do that too. It's not just about forgetting the content. What's actually happening inside your brain is much more fascinating. A lot of us believe that we're decent at multitasking, especially when it comes to passive entertainment. We think watching a show while playing a game is just efficient use of our time. I mean, why not just level up your character or playing a competitive match while watching a video content, right? It feels like you're being productive, and it feels like you're maximizing every minute of your time. But here's the thing. I believe that only about 2 to 5% of the people can actually multitask effectively. Realistically, it's probably less than 1%. For the other 95 to 98%, or like possibly 99.99% of us, our brains are literally switching back and forth between these tasks, not doing them simultaneously. And you gotta think about that for a second. What feels like doing 2 things at once is actually your brain rapidly toggling between 2 activities. It's like constantly flipping between 2 TV channels with different shows. When we play games while watching content, our brain is constantly making these micro decisions about what to pay attention to, the dialogue in the show or the enemy approaching in the game. It could be something like that. Each of these switches isn't free either. It costs our brain resources. Every time you switch focus from your game to catch what a YouTuber just said, then back to your game, your brain has to reorient itself. This constant switching creates what cognitive scientists called attention residue, where part of your brain remains stuck on the previous tasks even as you switch to a new one. It's like having a mental leftover what clutter up your thinking. While you're trying to focus on defeating the boss in the game, a portion of your mental processing power is still tied up in that YouTube video you were just watching microseconds ago. This divided attention means decreased performance in both activities. And I'm just gonna guess about this. I'm not conclusive, but I think people who frequently media multitask performs worse on tests of attention filtering and working memory. Even when they're trying to focus on just one thing, this means that your habit of playing games while watching video isn't just affecting how well you do on those specific activities. It's changing how effectively your brain from handling focusing in general. The costs of task switching are kind of significant. At least for me, frequently switching between the tasks, what I experience is a reduction of cognitive efficiency. This manifests as a slower reaction time and increasing errors. So you might think that you're doing fine grinding away at that game while half listening to that podcast. You're actually performing worse than both. than if you did each separately. You're probably doing better on the game part though. You're probably not even paying that much attention to the podcast. And you know what the scary part is? The more you practice this kind of divided attention, the more your brain gets rewired to expect constant simulation and task switching. It becomes like a cycle. The more you multitask, the worse you get at focusing deeply, which makes a single tasking feel boring or even uncomfortable, which in turn pushes you to multitask even more. Because I think your brain adapts to what you're asked to do most often. And heavy media multitaskers have been shown to develop deficits in attention filtering and working memory that extends beyond their multitasking sessions. This means that even when you're trying to focus on a single task later, like studying for an exam or having an important conversation, your brain might struggle because you trained it to constantly seek additional input. I mean, think about how often you reach for your phone during quiet moments, or how difficult it feels to just sit and read a book. Like, I'm not much of a book reader, and I tried reading a book, and my God, it's so hard to do that. Like, there's no background music or urge to check notification. These aren't random behaviors. They're just a direct result of me training my own brain to operate in a state of divided attention. So what if I told you that your evening routine of playing a game while watching a YouTube video isn't just a harmless habit, but it's physically restructuring your brain? Your entertainment choices are actively sculpting neural pathways that might be working against you in ways you've never imagined. Our brain doesn't just passively receive information, they're constantly changing based on what we do most often. Think of your brain like a forest, where paths form based on where people walk most frequently. The trails you use daily becomes wider and easier to travel, while the ones that you rarely take gradually disappear. Your brain physically changes its sculpture to optimize for whatever you do repeatedly. So what that means is that if you spend hours with your attention divided between the game and that YouTube video, you're not just passing time. You're literally carving neural superhighways dedicated to fragmented attention. Your brain is adapting to becoming more efficient at what you're asking it to do, repeatedly switching between different types of information without fully processing either one. And if my sources are correct, this 2014 research discovered something particularly concerning when they examined the brains of heavy media multitaskers. These individuals showed reduced gray matter density in their brain, and I had to look up what that was, and it's a critical region involved in movement, memory, and emotion. That's like the short version. This isn't just some academics. It's a physical change in brain architectures that affects how you're functioning in everyday situations. So each time you practice the divided gaming while half watching content state, you're strengthening the neural connections dedicated to shallow processing and weakening those responsible for sustained, deep focus. Your neurons are physically rewiring themselves to prefer fragmented attentions over deep concentration, literally changing your brain's architecture with each split attention gaming session. And these brain changes manifest in the real world challenges that might seem unrelated in your gaming habits. Maybe you've noticed that you can't sit through a work meeting without checking your phone, or reading more than a few paragraphs of text feels extremely boring. These behaviors aren't random personality quirks. They're direct consequences of how you've trained your neural pathways. The more concerning aspect is that these pathways become self-reinforcing. As your brain adapts to prefer constant novelty and stimulation, activities requiring sustained attention becomes to feel increasingly difficult. Your brain actually begins to resist engaging its deep focus networks when they're needed because they become weakened from underuse, while your task switching networks have grown dominant. Because imagine spending 3 hours every day explicitly training your brain to reject deep focus in favor of constantly switching, then suddenly expecting that same brain to perform brilliantly during a task requiring sustained concentration, like studying for an exam or working on a complex project, or even having a meaningful conversation. It's like training exclusively for a sprint and then being surprised when you struggle to run a marathon. The reality is that your brain optimizes for whatever you practice most frequently. If you spend the majority of your leisure time in the divided attention state, your brain adapts accordingly, regardless of whether that adaptation serves your broader life goals. This phenomenon explains why you might find yourself checking your phone even when no notifications has arrived, or why you feel that strange sense of emptiness when you're just sitting quietly without any media input. Your brain has developed neural pathways that actively seek constant stimulation, creating almost an addict-like relationship with novelty and information. Like, here's an example. Watch like a YouTuber that makes reaction videos talk about a video that they're watching. They're not like simultaneously grinding out a game or checking their Discord messages. Well, they might be. Chances are that they're not. This absence isn't coincidental. I'm pretty sure it's deliberate. I mean, while your brain might crave that constant stimulation, have you ever wondered why content creators, the very people who make a living capture our attention, almost never consume media the way most of us do? Like, when you watch a reaction channel, you notice that they give their undivided attention to the content that they're reviewing. Sure, it could also be about looking engaged for the audience. I think it's because they understand the fundamental truth about human cognition that many of us overlook. They know that catching subtle details, emotional beats, and nuanced moments require their complete focus. Missing these elements wouldn't just make for poor reaction videos, it'll fundamentally diminish their experience and performance. The same principle applies to professional gamers and high-level streamers. When they're competing seriously, you won't find them casually watching Netflix on a second monitor. They understand that even what seems like a harmless background distractions can significantly impact their gameplay. The milliseconds lost to attention shifts might not seem consequential in casual play, but at competitive levels, those tiny lapses often determine success or failure. So what's particularly interesting is that even when these guys appear to be juggling multiple tasks effortlessly, they rarely truly multitasking. Instead, they're developing the ability to switch focus rapidly between different elements of their stream and or content. And you know what the funny thing is? They don't even know it. At least I don't think that they do. So while these creators respect cognitive constraints, most of us are living in an illusion about our own multitasking abilities. When you're gaming with a YouTube video playing in the background, your brain isn't just processing both, it's actually taking longer to absorb either, with significantly more errors and comprehension than if you focus on just one activity. This isn't just some minor efficiency problem. It's fundamentally changing the way that you're taking away from that content. Let me ask you something. The last 3-hour podcast, or it could be a 2-hour podcast or even a 30-minute one that you listen to while grinding resources in a game, if someone asks you to explain the main argument or a key point right now, how detailed could your explanation be? I'm pretty sure most people, this will create an uncomfortable moment of realization that they believe that they absorbed the content, but when pressed for specifics, they got nothing. Maybe a few things here and there, and maybe no real context behind it. So this disconnect between what we think that we're processing and what's actually retaining isn't random. It's rooted in the fundamental limitations of our cognitive architecture. Your working memory functions like a container with a finite capacity. When you're actively engaged in the game, like tracking enemies, making a split-second decisions, navigating environments, that container is mostly filled. So the podcast or a YouTube video that you think that you're absorbing is actually competing for that tiny remaining space, and inevitably most of it is being hand-fisted in there. So we constantly overestimate how much information that we retain from secondary media when multitasking. You might genuinely believe that you understood and processed that educational video while playing, but in reality, Your brain was likely engaged in what cognitive scientists call shallow processing, essentially just registering that words and sound occurred without meaningful engagement with the content or storing them in long-term memory. Now think about what this means for your media consumption habits. Those hundreds of hours of podcasts or video essays you've listened to while gaming. You might have captured maybe 20 to 30% of their actual content, and often the shallowest, least nuanced portion of that. The subtle arguments, the compelling evidence, the emotional resonance, all these elements typically require deeper processing that divided attention simply doesn't allow. And I noticed this in my own habits when I started challenging myself to summarize content I thought I absorbed while gaming. And what makes this even worse is that you're not even losing information. We're training ourselves to be satisfied with the shallow level of engagement. Each time you half listen to a podcast while gaming, it feels like you've got it. You're reinforcing a pattern of incomplete learning that becomes your new normal. Your brain begins to accept the surface level processing as sufficient, making it increasingly difficult to engage deeply even when you're trying to focus on a single task. This explains a pattern many of us have experienced but rarely recognize, why we find ourselves drawn to the same type of content repeatedly, or why we constantly seek new inputs instead of fully engaging what we already have. When you only partially process content for the first time, you've left with a strange sense of both familiarity and uncertainty. Like, you know when you've heard it before but can't quite remember the details? This creates a cycle where you either revisit the same content repeatedly or constantly seek new stimulation to satisfy that nagging sense of incomplete understanding. And this implication extends far beyond entertainment. If you're using this time to learn new skills, study for classes, or stay informed about important topics, the reality is that your divided attention is probably delivering a fraction of value you think it is. You might spend hours learning while gaming, only to discover later that very little of that information actually stuck in a meaningful way. So after years of media multitasking, many of us has unknowingly conditioned our brains to resist single tasking to the point where focusing on just one thing feels uncomfortable or even anxiety-inducing. But here's the good news. Your focus isn't permanently damaged. I know it's cliche to hear this, but your brain is like a muscle. That portion of it is weakened from a disuse. And with the right approach, you can rebuild it faster than you might think. When you first try to break the habit of a background entertainment while gaming or possibly anything else, you'll probably notice something unsettling, like something's missing, and you know what that something is. And that will make you reach for your second screen or another browser, or even your phone or tablet or whatever you use. And that feeling isn't the sign that you need more stimulation. It's actually the first indication that your rehab is working. It's like a brain withdrawal response, similar to what happens when you cut back on sugar or caffeine or possibly alcohol. I don't know, I don't really drink. I haven't really drank anything, but I assume that's what it's like for those. So when you turn on the game, and when you get that feeling of wanting to just turn, for just, you know, a grind that's going to be a little bit mindless, just try 15 minutes of gameplay without YouTube running in the background. Because those 15 minutes might feel surprisingly challenging. You might find yourself feeling oddly anxious, restless, or even having a physical urge to turn on some background noise. Don't fight the feeling. Instead, focus them with curiosity. Oh, that's interesting. My brain really wants that secondary input right now. This awareness is part of that healing process. I think the most powerful approach is treating this like a physical therapy for your mind. Just as you wouldn't expect to recover from a muscle injury by immediately returning to an intense workout, you shouldn't expect your focus to instantly bounce back to perfect condition. The key is gradual progression. after you can comfortably game without background media for 15 minutes. Try doing it for 20 minutes, then 30. Similarly, try watching a YouTube video with your complete attention. No phone checking, no game grinding in the background for just one video, a 10-minute video. Heck, you're doing something else while listening to me talk. I don't know if it was cooking or maybe even gaming, possibly gaming. And what's crazy is how quickly your brain can adopt when given the chance. Most people seeing significant improvements in their focus capabilities in a month of constant practice. Your brain wants to be able to focus deeply. It's actually its natural state before we trained it otherwise. The rehab timeline is surprisingly short compared to how many hours many of us have developed these distracted habits. Probably way more than hours, possibly years. And I'm gonna guess the environment that you create around yourself is gonna play a huge role in this recovery process. So, because I think our brain responds powerfully to physical cues and contexts. Maybe you need a dedicated single-tasking gaming zone. That might seem a little extreme. A specific spot where you never multitask with media, or maybe you need to physically put your phone in another room. That's also a bit extreme. Even small adjustments like turning your second monitor off completely and just minimizing windows can signal to your brain that this is a different kind of attention experience. And I'm pretty sure meditation and mindfulness practice can significantly accelerate your focus recovery too. Because even 5 minutes of mindfulness practice, like simply paying attention to your breath and gently bring your mind back when it wanders, is essentially a workout for your attention system. It's training the exact neural pathways that gets weakened by constantly media switching. These practices don't just help you focus better, they also make you more aware when your attention is being fragmented in the first place. I'll be upfront with you all that I don't do it every single day. I forget sometimes, or sometimes I don't even feel like doing it, or the laziness would just take over. But I see it like a Dunning-Kruger effect. I did do it a lot in the beginning, and then stop for a while, and then slowly picking it back up with, less and less gaps the further I go. So now every time you resist that urge to turn on that secondary media stream, you're rebuilding that neural pathway that supports sustained attention. And unlike many other forms of rehab, the benefits extends far beyond gaming. They impact every aspect of your life where focus matters. So throughout this video, I've talked about how dividing your attention shapes your cognitive abilities, but now it's time to think about what comes next for you. The quality of your attention genuinely determines the quality of your experience. This isn't just some motivational phrase. Focus on a single task enhances both cognitive performance and overall life satisfaction. When you're fully present in your game, you probably have like a more rich experience. When you're completely engaged in that conversation, that relationship probably feels deeper. And when you're immersed in your work, I don't know about this, but your creativity will probably expand. I haven't done it enough for me to confirm that, but I'm pretty sure that it does. So I want to leave you with this question. What kind of attentions do you want to cultivate in your life? The type that skims the surface of multiple experiences? The kind that just dives deep into one? Start with just 1 minute today. If you can do that, then try doing 2 minutes. And then keep increasing that number. And that number, might go down some days. It might go down a lot on other days. And then you're gonna slowly pick that up again. Sometimes you're gonna skip days too. And I know some of you were playing a game while this video was playing. So try doing a single task on something. Anything. You will feel uncomfortable, especially when that thing feels a little boring. But, think of it as growth. Try to do a single task on something. Anything. You will feel uncomfortable. But however, think of that as that you're always improving.
ます。